All right, we are live for Monday, May 18th. Welcome back to another live stream. I want to start off by just saying that I've really begun to enjoy these streams. They have become a really cool place for me to work through ideas, think through topics. These tend to be pretty off the cuff. I do a little bit of outlining and I download some images and I'll do a little bit of graphic stuff in advance to be able to just have something interesting for the video component of this, so it's just not me talking and whatnot. But in general, these are not as heavily researched as, say, a Boyd Book Club video or one of my Fire Service Warrior videos or any of the other videos that I've done over the ages and still continue to put out. These are a little more informal, off the cuff, but they're a really interesting way for me to sit down and start documenting ideas, working through ideas, identifying places to do additional research. So for tonight, I want to talk about this idea of life in a post-truth world and what that means, and the idea that there is both real beauty and some real ugliness in the idea of living in a world where we question objective truth, and some of the historical roots of that, how that manifests in a very positive way in modern society, but also some of the ways where it tends to cause problems and get us in trouble. So that's going to be tonight's talk. So when we talk about this idea for living in a post-truth world, right? What we're discussing is the idea that there is a lack of shared meaning. And as any of you who've spent any time paying attention to me know, meaning making is a huge component of what I think is important in our way of making decisions and acting in the world. As a student of decision making, as a philosopher of decision making in a lot of ways, I think that meaning making is one of the central themes. And if we live in a world where it is impossible to say there is objective meaning, which is sort of the implication of a post-truth world, that poses a lot of problems for how we are to respond to and act in the world. And I think we see that day in, day out in the climate that we live in now. But there's also some really helpful, useful knowledge to be gained from having that sort of questioning attitude. And the reality is humans have probably questioned what constitutes truth as long as we've had our modern capacity for reason and meaning making. So let's start by taking a little bit at some of what I think are some of the important historical pieces of that and kind of build forward from there. So probably the biggest school of thought that we know of that begins to question this idea that we can know anything, that knowledge is something that we can have, are the skeptics, right? Peril, Arcelius, these are two of the predominant thinkers in the Greek skeptic school of thought, and it is through them that our ideas of skepticism, of doubt as a rigorous intellectual pursuit come forth. I say it comes through them because they are, of course, documented in history. But again, I think that probably the idea that we've been questioning truth goes back as long as we've had a modern human brain. And it's just that by the time we get to the skeptics, we now have writing and we have history being preserved, and the recollections and information of these sort of philosophers of their age have remained available to us, right? So it's with the skeptics in Greece that we kind of lay that undercurrent. And the undercurrent of skepticism and questioning authority, questioning truth, questioning knowledge continues forward. We get into the time period where Erasmus and Martin Luther bring about what I sort of think of as the end of authority. And when I say authority, I mean particularly Luther. Erasmus sets the course for this And it's Erasmus's thought that really lays a seed and a foundation for Luther's eventual challenging of the Roman Catholic Church to come about in the 1500s. And what we see with Luther is the emergence of the Protestant Reformation, which calls into question the legitimacy of the papacy, the legitimacy of the Catholic Church as the arbiter of knowledge about Christianity. And I refer to this as the end of authority because to me, this is the moment in time when the idea that one can question what a expert has to say about the matter takes on its own practical and intellectual significance in a way that I think has forever changed history. If we think about what emerged from Luther's, 99 Theses on the Dort Wittenberg, is, initially Luther is responding just to the problem of indulgences being sold in the church. He's really dealing with a problem of corruption, and he points this out. But eventually, what he comes to advocate for is this idea that because the system that is the Catholic Church in his mind is corrupt, and I think history bears out that was probably true, that his assessment was a valid one. Because of that, his theological position then becomes one that it is only the individual who can know God for him or herself, that there is no longer a authority or legitimacy in sort of clerical reign. And that idea is a really important one because it sets the stage, I think, for most of the way Western thought has continued to evolve when it comes to notions of authority. We leave the 1500s, and the next two characters in this kind of time period that I think are important are Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Immanuel Kant. And in the Enlightenment, we see Rousseau and Kant building upon this foundation of skepticism, this foundation of questioning, this foundation of delineating space for that which is the domain of the clerical, the ecclesiastical, the religious, and the domain of reason. And that is really Kant's work, right? That's Kant's project in the Critique of Pure Reason, which is, again, it's a tough book to read. It's a very impenetrable text on a lot of levels. But ultimately, Kant's aim in that book is to set out that the domain of faith and the domain of knowledge the domain of reason, I should say, are two different things. And that, yes, in Kant's view, there is an idea, there is a validity to the notion that the notions of God are ones that are wholly personal truths. And yet, the exercise of reason, of comprehensive thought about topics, can bring about objective, or at least reasonably objective, understandings of something. That is Kant's aim in the Enlightenment, right? And we talked about Kant's essay, an answer to the question, what is enlightenment, back in the Dare to Know episode. And Kant charges us with that, right? He charges us with dare to know, to have the courage to use our own reason, which is once again an advocacy of this skeptical, questioning viewpoint. I think that there is a lot of truth and beauty in those things. And yet, we see in these thinkers presented here one side of the argument, right? We see in all of them a very Western mentality, which is, at the time, male-dominated, ignores the rights of women, children, slaves. I mean, even Kant in his What is Enlightenment essay implies, he doesn't imply, he flat out says that Reason is something that women don't avail themselves of because they choose to remain like children and have a childlike mind. Man, it's brutal. Like, dude had some really interesting thoughts, but wow. Yeah. So we see one view, and all of these thinkers lead to this notion of knowledge, of truth, in a very modernist sense. Now, modernist does not necessarily imply wholly analytical in sort of the David Hume sense, right? I've talked in other videos, particularly Boyd Book Club episodes, about kind of the headbutting between Hume and Kant, and the notion that there is wholly objective truth that Kant kind of goes, I don't know about that. We can use reason, but I don't know that there is a wholly deducible set of objective truths that allow for sort of the level of perfect knowledge that Hume's sort of theories and hypotheses would suggest, right? So I think it's important when we look at this idea of where questioning has come from, that we also go beyond the modern and we kind of get into looking at what would classically be what would be considered a postmodernist thinking, which is really questioning even the questions that we ask. And for me, there are a few people that I'd love for you to be acquainted with. The first of these is Mary Wollstonecraft, who writes A Vindication of the Rights of Women, Simone de Beauvoir, Arundhati Roy, Michel Foucault, and then the queen of YouTube, Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints herself. All of these thinkers, these 5 thinkers that I point out, are in their own way what I consider critical theorists. They are not critical theorists, i.e. belonging to the Frankfurt School. They are critical theorists in that they are engaged in the process of critique and criticism of the implicit and tacit belief systems that are in play in thoughts about knowledge and the domain of epistemology, okay? And what all 5 of these thinkers, and plenty of other people, but we have to draw some lines here. This is a shorter video, right? What all of these thinkers are pointing to is that, yes, these previous thinkers were right to ask questions. They were right to say that we don't have perfect knowledge, that we should question things, that we should come to our own understanding. But you don't go far enough. That is the claim, that you don't go far enough, Luther. You don't go far enough, Kant. You certainly don't go far enough, Peril, in your questioning of the things that you held as implicit and understood, right? So it's from sort of these critical thinkers that we really see the idea that emerges in so much of what is now regarded as continental philosophy, but really just the idea of questioning your orientation, right? That postmodern project that Boyd gets identified with by Ozinga of question not only the idea of what we know, but why we think we know it. Why do I think I know what I know? And all of these folks really lay an interesting they lay an interesting foundation for considering and thinking about where our history of truth and the notions of skepticism and questioning the commonly accepted truths come from. That takes us into this idea of what is post-truth then in a modern sense. And Sean Illing wrote this pretty interesting article in Vox back in, I believe it was 2018, August of 2018, I believe, was when this came out. And I'll put a link down in the description for this one. And for Illing, his notion is that a post-truth world, and the discussion that he has is that a post-truth world is a place where shared objective standards for truth have disappeared. And I think we can see that in the modern discussion that we are in right now with COVID-19 is, I mean, it's absolutely today's problem of what is truth, what is valid truth, where can we go with this? But it's not just in pandemic response where this comes up. We see this in all sorts of science denialism, right? We see it in the anti-vaccine movement. We see it in people who are deniers of anthropogenic climate change. We see it in the anti-intellectualism and the anti-expertise, the idea of dismissing expertise for a popular narrative or a comforting narrative. And that is a very real concern. It's not a new concern. These are not things that are new. People have been denying the legitimacy of consensus-built science for as long as we've been doing science in a modern sense, right? There's, you know, Galileo gets excommunicated by the church. You know, the Copernican revolution is a heretical event. All of these things that we have seen come about throughout time are examples of the denial of science, with science being the closest we come to obtaining or peering at objective truth. Now, I do think it's important that while we need to be scientifically literate, we also need to be aware of the fact that, as the critics would point out, why do you think that is so, right? We live in a world where we think that, you know, we teach Newtonian mechanics. We teach kids F equals ma and the laws of motion in physics class. And then somewhere down the line we go, and at some point those break down because this whole wave-particle duality thing happens. And, you know, objects no longer act like objects, they act like waves, and we can't really explain it. There are limits to the scale at which our scientific understandings apply. And the same holds true in these questions of what truth is, right? So as we think about truth, right? Illing, in his article, the interview that he conducts, makes the argument that there is no such thing as a post-truth world. We can't live in a post-truth world because simply by suggesting that, we are in fact asserting another truth. And I think he's right. I think that the post-truth label is not a really effective one. I don't know that it is wholly appropriate. But what I do think is that it points to the notion that we no longer as a society have a consensus understanding of what qualifies a piece of idea, a belief, to become justified. In the domain of epistemology, the study of knowledge, the current sort of philosophical understanding, broadly speaking, is that knowledge is a justified true belief. And that that JTB standard is the idea that something only reaches the status of being known, of having the status of knowledge, when we have a belief that is justified and it is true. So that topic in and of itself, studying justified true belief, bare minimum can be a semester-long philosophy course. Where I want to go with it briefly is this idea that truth is something that is composed by consensus. It is any one of us may have an observation on the world and what is true from our vantage point, and it will be different from another's vantage point. It is only through knitting together the multiple vantage points of many observers, discounting narrative as best as possible, or questioning the narrative that we use to explain why we see what we see. That we are able to start getting past these sort of 5 elements that are pictured here in the characteristics of science now, right? Getting rid of fake debate, trying to detach ourselves as much as humanly possible from logical fallacies, not imposing impossible standards, not cherry-picking evidence, and not engaging in conspiracy theories. These 5 things are challenging for all of us. Being part of the social system and being connected to the social system is a hugely important thing for human survival. That's why we tend not to question our orientation. And yet, if we are going to be rigorous thinkers and we are going to question things, we should also be questioning why we believe what we believe, why we think what we know rises to the level of knowledge. And remind ourselves in that critical theoretical viewpoint that our objective fact, our objective view, means that we are taking something and holding it out in front of us and looking at it like it's an object. The view that I get looking at this object is different than the view that you will get as I hold this object out. There is no single objective view. There is no unitary objective view. There is, in that postmodern lexicon, no univocity of meaning. Meaning is something that we construct. It is something that we build, and it comes to its fruition best when we do it through rigorous and community-driven methods. So this is where we are. And, you know, why are we here? One, I think there's just an inborn humanity to it, right? I have said for many, many years that the reason humans do most of what we do is that we are apes in pants. We are chimps with a beta expansion package, and that much of what we have done, the systems we have created, the understandings that form the foundation for how we live in the world, are ways of keeping us from shrieking in the darkness because of uncertainty and fear. Those things may not be rooted in falsifiable or alternatively predictable patterns of behavior that we can use to understand the world around us to some degree, right? Those things, those aims, those natural human tendencies then get captured and used as part of tribalisms, right? As part of community building. And that has many different ways that it can manifest in the modern era. And when I say modern, I mean our current era. In the very current era that we're in, we are seeing a rash of it in partisan politics, particularly in the United States. And I say particularly because that's where I live. It's happening all over the world. All you have to do is read newspapers from places other than where you live, and you will see this common pattern of partisan politics manifesting itself in tribalism by bad faith actors. And what do I mean by bad faith actors? I mean people who will intentionally skew the consensus belief, the consensus understanding that has been developed through a fairly rigorous, or as rigorous as we can have, process of questioning why things are happening and acting on them with the intention of moving through the project, as opposed to acting from a narrative-driven viewpoint. This happens in all sorts of domains. It would be absolutely foolish of me and probably cowardly of me to not point out that that's obviously happening right now with the COVID-19 thing. We can have policy differences about whether or not the country should open up or not, or how the country should open up or not. Those are policy questions, and those should be wholly unemotional conversations on some level, right? Emotion's important because human beings are involved and human lives are involved. being wholly unemotional isn't healthy. However, we should be detaching from the narrative that we like, the narrative that we feel comfortable with. To invoke Musashi, we should set aside a preferred tool to examine this problem and tackle it, and instead pick up the best tool that there is. So what do we do? What do we do as human beings who have to make meaning and live in this world that's filled with all of this confusion? We can follow Kant's imperative of daring to know, right? We can listen to people who have made themselves if not subject matter experts, at least subject matter communicators on a topic. If you are somebody who if you fall into the anti-vaxxer camp and you think that even though Andrew Wakefield's article in The Lancet was retracted and thrown out and he lost his medical license because of that article, if you think that vaccines are the problem, go read Eula Biss's book on immunity. It is a beautifully written book that engages with this topic in a really profound way, from the perspective of a mother who was questioning for herself what vaccines to give her child. If you have issues, if you are a climate change denier, if you don't think that humans have an impact on the climate, okay, I disagree with you because 97% of climate scientists disagree with you, but I also think that there would be something valuable in going and reading Greta Thunberg's book, No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference. It's a collection of her speeches. And if you approach it with empathy for her position, you may learn something. Obviously, when it comes to the pandemic situation, listen to infectious disease experts. Your favorite cardiologist, your favorite ER doctor is not the person to be listening to about how we should be medically handling this. That's not their lane. You wouldn't ask your infectious disease doctor what to do about your heart attack in the operating room. Guess what? They wouldn't try to tell you what to do either. Experts and people who have an area of expertise tend to stick to their lane. Follow those folks. Go to the CDC's website. I'm going to go on a limb here. Don't look at the news for what you should be doing to properly handle the current COVID-19 crisis. Go to the CDC's website. That's their job, right? Dare to know. Question what you believe. Look at other sources. Use those things as ways of guiding your own exploration of knowledge and finding some level of truth. Ideally, lowercase truth. That's it. That's my spiel for the week. Truth is dead. Long live truth. So, with that, I dropped my syllabus for semester 3 of Boyd Book Club today over on Patreon. So for those of you who are Patreon supporters, when this video went live, the syllabus for semester 3 of Boyd Book Club dropped. If you are not a Patreon supporter and you are enjoying these live streams, or you want to check out the Boyd Book Club projects that get really in the weeds about human decision making and particularly about Colonel John Boyd's theories, you can go on to you just saw it up on the screen there, patreon.com/Chris FSW. For as little as $2 a month, you can jump in on the conversation, get the videos as they're being released. Semester 1 of Boyd Book Club is going up every Thursday right now on YouTube, and that'll continue through the beginning of June. Semester 2 will start going live sometime after that. Semester 3 will go public after we get through semesters 1 and 2 being released. But semester 3 will be live for patrons beginning June 4th. So that's it. With that, I would like to go ahead and thank those folks who are patrons, everybody who's a patron, but particularly Kevin Richson, Travis, Andrew Kehoe, Eddie Crombie, Chase Morgan, Adam Mayers, Ryan Trader, Justin Ide, James Brennan, John Kwan, Sonny O'Connor, David Hinosa, Eric Chisholm, Rock Clapp, Zach Riddle, Brandon Douglas, Timothy Bullard, Trevor Hargerhorst. For all my patrons, thank you. For everybody who goes and buys a book, buys a t-shirt, supports the channel and my work in any way, I really appreciate all that you do. I'll see you soon. Cheers.